It all started like any other day at school, but something was wrong. They told me to talk to a responsible adult in times of trouble. The problem is, I can't trust any adult. Not a single one. So now, here I am, turning to the internet, desperate for anyone to help me or at least point me in the right direction. The first sign came during a normal school day. I watched as the other kids laughed, joked, and made friends, while I was shoved into lockers and called awful names. Recess was no better. Some of the worst kids wanted to carve words into my skin with a penknife. My legs ran before I even thought, adrenaline taking over, but somehow I caught the attention of my gym teacher. He told me to try out for the track team, as if that would make things better. At home, no one would notice if I stayed out late. Dad was always on business trips, and Mom was perpetually lost in her own world of haze. So, I joined the track team. Practice was grueling, and the other kids mocked me in the locker room, always leering at my naked body. I started walking home sweaty and filthy, just to avoid their cruel eyes. At home, I'd shower in the bathroom that always smelled like weed, trying to forget what had happened. Then came the day when things shifted. The worst of the bullies were absent, so I could finally breathe. I took my time between classes, letting the silence of the school wrap around me. But as I neared my locker, I realized I'd left my math books inside. The normal route was blocked off, so I took the long way around. It was then that I heard something no one should ever hear. It was a conversation that twisted my gut. One teacher, a man I'd never seen, was speaking to a girl, her voice cracking with fear. "Take off your shirt," he ordered. "If you don't, I'll have no choice but to fail you." I froze, horrified. The girl was crying, desperate. But what I saw next, no one should ever witness. 3 teachers were holding scalpels toward her, their hands steady as if this was normal. "It won't hurt if you hold still," one of the teachers said, their voice smooth and cold. I didn't know what to do. If I opened that door, they'd see me. 3 grown adults against one terrified kid. I was powerless. But something deep inside told me I had to stop them. I grabbed the nearest fire alarm, using my shirt to cover my hand, and pulled it. My heart pounded in my chest as I dove into a nearby empty locker, praying they'd leave. The teachers didn't notice me. They rushed past, focused on their task. The girl ran outside, out into the cold night. I stayed hidden until I was sure they were gone. But even then, I couldn't shake the terror. I thought of calling the police, but I had no information to give them. No names. No clear faces. Just a horrible memory I couldn't forget. The next day, I searched for the girl. She was nowhere to be found. The teachers? Too fast. I never got a clear look at them. I had no answers. Only the fear that this was far from over. That night, against my better judgment, I stayed after practice, hoping to find something. The mocking from the team still echoed in my mind, but this time it was different. They made me drink toilet water, which led to 2 showers instead of 1. That meant I was alone again. The school was empty, silent, save for the hum of the lights. I passed the same room, the one where it had all happened, but this time nothing. I almost dared to hope they had stopped, second-guessing themselves. But then I heard it, a scream. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. Another classroom. I peered through the window, my stomach sinking. There she was, the same girl. But this time, it was worse. Much worse. The teachers were cutting her open, her body hooked up to strange, unnerving machines. "You'll cooperate this time," one of them said, their voice too calm. The girl's cries filled the air, desperate and full of terror. I couldn't look away, even though every instinct screamed for me to run. But then one of the teachers saw me. Her eyes locked on mine through the window. Panic surged through me. I bolted. I ran, fast and hard, heart pounding, and I pulled the fire alarm again. This time, I dove into a garbage bin, holding my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. I heard them pass by, their voices distant but clear. "We won't leave until we find who pulled the alarm," one of the teachers muttered. But then another voice, colder, more sinister, cut through. "What about the girl?" I didn't stay to hear the answer. I ran, knowing deep down that the nightmare was far from over. I didn't hear an answer, but I did hear their footsteps fade as they left the building. My body screamed to get out. I ran for the nearest exit, only to find it locked. Panic rose, thick and suffocating. Something was terribly wrong, and I didn't have the luxury of wasting time running through the halls like a rat in a maze. I grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher, covered my hands with my shirt, and smashed the glass of the door with all my might. I didn't look back. I ran, adrenaline coursing through me. But after the long practice and everything that had happened, exhaustion hit me hard. I couldn't risk running down the open street, exposed. So, I found the tallest tree I could, climbed it, and hid, watching the school from the branches. Minutes later, the wail of sirens cut through the night, and the fire truck screeched to a halt outside. Voices reached me from below, firefighters and teachers talking in hushed tones. I heard one of the firemen ask, "Everything all right?" "No," replied the teacher sharply. "Someone saw us." "Do you know who?" the fireman asked. "No," the teacher answered, "but I'm pretty sure it was a student." All the teachers here are tall enough to look through the windows without jumping or standing on their tiptoes. Why would a student be here so late? Another teacher wondered aloud. "The track team stays after school for practice," came the reply from yet another teacher. Maybe it was one of them. A sinking feeling spread through me. All the track kids were sick yesterday. Another teacher pointed out. They were right. If they were looking for the culprit, they would be coming for me. I stayed in my tree, frozen in place. The firemen and teachers didn't leave. They were waiting for me to make myself visible, but I couldn't, not yet. I had to wait for nightfall, for the darkness to swallow me whole. Finally, after what felt like hours, it was dark enough. I carefully descended the tree, crawled through a nearby hedge, and made my way home. It was nearly midnight when I finally slipped through the door, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. My mother was waiting for me, angry. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded, but before I could answer, she handed me the phone. The police were just on the line. I wanted to tell her what happened. I wanted to scream, to explain the horrors I'd seen, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I broke down, shaking and crying, terrified of what might come next. She hugged me, unsure, and called the police again to tell them I'd returned safely. But that was a lie. I wasn't safe. I couldn't be. Calling the police seemed like the right thing to do, but who would believe me? Who would believe a kid who had witnessed 3 teachers performing a brutal surgery on a girl? No anesthesia, no mercy. And worse, what if the firemen were in on it too? I felt trapped, a pawn in some twisted game I didn't understand. Skipping school the next day seemed like the safest option. But then there was a girl. I couldn't just run. If I were in her shoes, I'd want someone to help. The next morning, I noticed a fresh cut on my hand, glass from the door during my escape. Would anyone notice? Would anyone care? When I stepped off the bus, I was immediately greeted by the principal. His face was hard to read, but I could feel something in the air, a tension. He led me to the waiting room, where I sat alone, heart racing. The silence in that room felt like it was suffocating me. I watched the clock tick slowly, every second stretching out. As the secretary observed me carefully, her eyes never leaving me. How was I supposed to act? How do you look when you're trying to seem innocent, when you know you're being watched? I stood and wandered over to the bookshelves, pretending to browse, trying to distract myself from the suffocating atmosphere. But the secretary's voice snapped through the quiet. "Sit down and don't make any noise." I did. Waiting. Waiting for what? To be questioned? Or worse? Another hour passed before the principal returned, ushering me into his office. I was told to sit in an old wooden chair, the creaky sound of it making my nerves fray even further. And then I saw them, 3 of the teachers from the night before, the same ones who had tortured the girl. They stood behind the principal, their eyes cold and calculating, staring at me like I was some kind of bug to be dissected. "We're sorry to make you wait so long," the principal said, his voice smooth, but there was something dark in his tone. "I had things to deal with. I just wanted to run, but I couldn't." "I suppose you're wondering why you're here," the principal continued. I forced a smile. "It beats being in class," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice trembled despite myself. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to deflect. "No," the principal replied matter-of-factly. "Someone broke a door window with a fire extinguisher and pulled the fire alarm yesterday afternoon. You're on the track team, which stays late to practice." "I'm sure you saw something." I froze. "I didn't see anything," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did you go home right away?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Have you already spoken to the rest of the team?" I swallowed hard. "Yes," I lied again. The teachers exchanged glances, silent but loaded with unspoken threats. My heart pounded, but I stayed quiet. What else could I say? The principal leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "You're lying," he said, his voice low and ominous. "Your mother filed a missing persons report yesterday because you hadn't come home. So, where were you really?" The teachers loomed behind him, their eyes cold and expectant. They weren't leaving until they got an answer. I felt trapped, cornered, like a rat in a cage. I scrambled for a response, anything to get them off my back. "I'll tell you, but only if they leave," I said quickly, my heart hammering in my chest. The principal glanced at the teachers. They exchanged silent looks, then nodded. One by one, they left the room, leaving me alone with the principal. The air was thick with tension. Could I trust him? His knowledge of the missing persons report was troubling. Was he part of whatever twisted scheme was happening at this school? I needed to think of a convincing lie, something that would buy me time, but my mind was spinning in a panic. Finally, I blurted it out, hoping it would sound believable. "The other kids, they're really mean to me," I stammered. "So what?" the principal asked, his voice sharp, cutting through my fragile defense. I froze, trying to hold it together, but the words rushed out before I could stop them. "I tried to kill myself," I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. The principal's expression shifted, his concern turning genuine. "Where?" he asked urgently, his eyes darting to my arms. I pointed to the small cut on my hand. "Here." I used glass from a broken Coke bottle. He didn't let me finish. "This is very serious," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We can't ignore this. I'm going to phone your parents, and you need to see the school nurse immediately." Panic surged through me. There was no way I could be alone now. I had an alibi, but I couldn't go to the nurse. I couldn't risk being under supervision. I needed to check on the girl. I had to know what was happening. "Wait," I pleaded, grasping at any excuse. "Track is the only thing in my life that makes me happy. Please don't make me miss practice." The principal hesitated, his gaze skeptical, but he finally relented. "Okay, but only for the sake of professionalism." My mom arrived shortly after, her face filled with concern. We went to the nurse, and I sat through a session of pointless worksheets and discussions about my suicidal tendencies. They made me feel small, insignificant, as if my life was nothing more than a collection of check boxes on a counselor's form. By the time it was over, the track practice had been canceled again. The majority of the team was absent, as they'd been the day before. I wondered if the same thing was happening again. "Come on, darling," my mom said gently, trying to comfort me. "Let's go to the movies and have some pizza." I felt a pang of guilt, but I lied again. "I better grab my history book so I can study." Mom's face fell. "I'm coming with you. You can't just be alone right now." "Why not?" I protested, trying to deflect. Give me one good reason why not, she said, her voice soft but firm. Her worry was palpable. The guilt hit me like a wave, but I couldn't let her stop me. I had to check the school one more time. I couldn't stand the thought of lying to her, but I needed to know. I needed to see if something was going on. As we left the school, I noticed her, the tortured girl. She was walking towards the bathroom, her head down, her steps slow and deliberate. There was no sign of the usual cheer she had once carried, just a hollow, defeated aura. I couldn't ignore it. You have to come with me, I whispered urgently. She looked up, startled. Who are you? She asked, her voice tremulous. I'm the one who pulled the fire alarm, I said quickly. I was trying to save you. Whatever they're doing to you, we have to tell the police. She didn't respond. Instead, she pulled out a notepad and began scribbling furiously. When she finished, she handed it to me. The note was chilling. It's all the police's idea. Now that they know someone knows, they're going to speed up the process. They've already started on other kids. They can hear everything we say. I opened my mouth to ask more, but then we both froze. One of the sadistic teachers was standing right in front of us, watching us with a cold, calculating gaze. The girl excused herself and hurried off to the bathroom, her footsteps quick and panicked. I bolted in the other direction, back to where I had left my mother, clutching her tightly like I was still suicidal. The teacher passed by without a second glance, as if everything were normal. The rest of the night was a blur, a dull movie, stale pizza, and the gnawing feeling in my stomach that I was getting deeper into something I couldn't escape. My mother did try. I had to give her credit for that. For once, she didn't even smoke that night. Instead, she attempted to engage me in card games and tried to coax me into having ice cream, her voice soothing, trying to pretend that everything was okay until it was time to go to sleep. But sleep didn't come. I couldn't escape the horrors that I had witnessed, and my mind replayed the tortured girl's words. If the police could hear everything, I could only imagine the terrible price she was paying right now. They knew too much. They must have known that I was the one she had spoken to. I didn't think it would take long before they came for me. The teachers would tell the police, and I would be marked as a threat, a witness. But I was just a kid, right? Who would believe me? Besides, I was already labeled as suicidal by the school's paperwork, so anything I said would be dismissed as psychological nonsense brought on by some non-existent depression. I was nothing, just a kid in a broken system. But I had seen too much. I couldn't do nothing. The day after my psychiatric evaluation arrived quickly. I was summoned to the nurse's office, and for legal reasons, my mom had to attend. My dad was off on some business trip in another part of the world. They asked me about my relationship with my parents, my peers, my teachers, what I liked to do in my spare time. And of course, they were all obsessed with my fears. Fears, like the ones that gnawed at me every night. The questions felt endless, probing, like they wanted to get to the root of whatever was wrong with me. The psychiatrist suggested taking a couple of weeks off from school, maybe repeating the term. There's no shame in repeating a year, she had said matter-of-factly, as if that would solve anything. I left the evaluation feeling even more useless and powerless. A couple of weeks away from school would mean I couldn't monitor the teachers. I couldn't keep an eye on the system that was torturing the students. But what else could I do? I had no plan. I had no one to turn to. So I turned to my mom, even though she was usually stoned. In nearly every memory I had of her, she was drifting away, caught in her haze, making poor decisions when the obvious answers were staring her in the face. But despite all of it, her love for me was never in question. And in this moment, she was the only one I could talk to without fearing death, torture, or worse. Darling, if there's anything at all you want to tell me, I'm ready to listen, my mom said as we drove home from the evaluation. I didn't trust that anyone wasn't listening to us. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything we did or said was being watched. Mom, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I know we haven't had lunch yet, But could we get a milkshake? I tried to sound weak, like I was asking for something trivial. The subtle irony of it worked. She agreed, and we stopped at a diner. That's when I finally told her everything. The horrific sight of the girl, strapped to strange machines while sadistic teachers cut into her abdomen, her screams echoing in my mind. How I pulled the fire alarms, thinking I could save her. How the school tried to lock me in. How I had escaped through a shattered window. How I had overheard the firemen, their cold voices discussing how to help the teachers with their twisted operations. And then I told her about the girl, the tortured girl who had confided in me. She had whispered that everything was the police's idea, that they were speeding up the process now that they knew someone else had discovered what they were doing. My mom stared at me, wide-eyed. Then, slowly, she asked, "Are you high?" "No," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "I'm not." She seemed to struggle with it. "Are you lying?" "No," I said again, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. When she finally realized I was serious, her composure cracked. She became hysterical, sobbing uncontrollably. I had to work hard to calm her down, to make sure we didn't draw any attention to ourselves in the diner. She cried about pulling me out of school, about moving away to the country. "We can't, Mom," I said, my voice strained. "What about the kids who are still getting tortured? They'll just keep doing this unless someone stops them." Mom paused, her sobs still heavy, but quieter now. She looked at me with a strange sadness in her eyes. "I know it's hard," she said softly, "but sometimes, when you know people are suffering and there's nothing you can do about it, you have to move away. You have to save yourself, or you'll become just another casualty. The world is cruel, darling. It's just cruel." I felt a lump form in my throat. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating. What if we contacted the police in a different city? I suggested weakly, grasping for something, anything that could change things. "They'll ignore us," she said bitterly. "They'll just report us to our own police, and we'd be apprehended. We'd be silenced. What about the Secret Service? Foreign nations?" I asked, my mind spinning. Mom scoffed, wiping her eyes. "I'm a pothead pixie, and you're a suicidal loony. They'll never believe us without proof. And without proof, we're nothing." My suggestion to capture evidence, whether through video or photographs, set my mom off. She was outraged, but she kept her voice down. "Why on earth are you so concerned about saving a group of vile, terrible children? They're always horrible to you. They force you to drink toilet water. Have you wondered if this torture might actually be too good for them?" I replied, "If it were me, I'd want someone to save me." She thought about it and then nodded. "You're right," she said. And that's when we came up with a plan. Well, mostly my mom came up with a plan. The school had already made a note that track practice was necessary for my mental health, so the teachers wouldn't think anything was off if I showed up. They had no reason to suspect me running laps, even though I hadn't attended classes that day. My mom pretended to be a board member, and she wandered the school, eavesdropping and hopefully gathering evidence on her phone. I showed up to practice wearing my running clothes, and when I got there, I saw there were only 5 of us. Coach pulled me aside. The principal told me what happened. "If you need someone to talk to, you can always talk to me." "Coach," I replied, "where is everyone?" "I don't know," he said. I was told they were all sick. Practice was uneventful, but against my better judgment, I stayed to shower at school. The mean kids must have been out sick, so there was nothing to fear this time. But once I was cleaned up, I waited for my mom at the meeting spot. 30 minutes passed, and she still hadn't shown up. Coach wouldn't leave my side until I had left the school safely. I told him I would look around for her, just to see where she had gone. Coach was insistent on sticking with me, so I couldn't snoop around as freely as I'd hoped. But on my way to my locker, I crossed paths with one of the sadistic teachers, the one I had seen torturing the girl. "Well, I'm surprised to see you here," the teacher said, as if nothing were wrong. The psychiatrist said that track was essential for your mental health. I replied, I thought track practice would be over by now. The teacher laughed. The poor kids' mothers, eh? I'll leave you to your coach. It was such a chilling, casual tone that it left me speechless. The teacher walked away, leaving me in a daze. I searched the school. No sign of my mom. I checked the parking lot, and her car was gone. My heart raced. Had she been apprehended? Were they torturing her to find out what I had told her? Had they hooked her up to those machines and dissected her like they did with the tortured girl? My mind was spinning with panic. She couldn't have ditched me. Absolutely not. My mom could be a mess, but she would never abandon me. Where's your mom's car? Coach asked, breaking my thoughts. It's gone, I answered. Coach was trying to find the right words. Your mother knows, right? Yeah, I said, quickly concocting a pathetic lie. I needed my space. She was being a cow, so she left. I hadn't realized until then how much I had messed up. I had no plan for what came next, no idea how to keep myself safe. I could see Coach wasn't convinced. Well, if that's the case, I should just drive you home. It's no trouble at all. I wasn't sure if I could trust him. For now, I assumed that all teachers were a potential threat. No thanks, Coach, I said. I'd rather walk. Coach hesitated. I can't let you do that. I'm sorry, but I just can't. So, I played along, pretending to accept his offer. Okay, I said. I know you're just doing your job. Can I use the bathroom first? He agreed, and as he went to start the car, I stole down the hall once more, checking for any signs of my mother or more tortured students. There was nothing. I left the school through the rear exit and fled into the woods, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders as I got farther from the building. It wasn't safe, but for now, it was the only choice I had left. As I slowly made my way home, a sense of dread began to settle in. 3 police cars were parked in my driveway. Why were they here? Had Coach alerted them to my disappearance? Was this connected to my mother? The police were moving in and out of the house as though they owned the place, but there was no sign of my mother. They were confiscating everything. Our home computer, phones, even items I couldn't fathom being relevant to their investigation, like my mother's electric toothbrush. One officer asked, "Any sign of the kid?" "Not yet," came the response. "We'll have to keep waiting." My heart pounded. My house no longer felt safe, and I was terrified for what might happen to me if they found me. More than anything, I worried for my mother. Where was she? Had they taken her too? I couldn't stay at home, so I snuck back to school, hoping that maybe my mother had returned there. The school parking lot still had cars, but not hers. Who could the teachers be torturing this late at night? Surely, the students' parents would call the police, right? Not that it would change anything, but at least it would force the police to act. They'd have to respond to the missing children, even if it was all part of the system they controlled. I crept up to the school doors, but they were locked. The best I could do was watch from a tree at the edge of the woods, hoping to spot my mother's car, or any sign of what was happening. But fatigue took over, and I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, the cars were gone. It was nearly daylight, and I had no desire to be anywhere near the school as it began. If anyone had seen me, I knew they'd have dealt with me. But for now, I was in the safety of a public library, hiding and keeping a low profile as I typed this. I'm too scared to return to school. The moment I set foot on the grounds, the police would find me and start asking questions they already knew the answers to. I want to call my father, but I don't have his number memorized. And what would I even say? That my mother might have been abducted? That I'm terrified and don't know where to turn? I'm on my own. There's a chance they're monitoring his phone too, and if I call him, they could trace it back to me. I don't know what to do. I'm scared out of my mind, and I have no idea where I'll sleep tonight or where my next meal is coming from. I just need help. But where can I turn?